Okay, everyone. Can you guys all hear me okay? I am so sorry about that. Some technical difficulties this morning. If you guys can see my slides, we'll go ahead and get started now. So to introduce myself, my name is Erica Schlick, and I am a blogger. You might know me as The Trail to Health. And my story is a little bit complicated, but I'm going to get into that here in just a second. In addition to being a Lyme survivor, I am also a certified health coach from IIN. I've had my blog since 2014. I wrote my first cookbook last year called Wandering Palate. And since then, my blog has evolved to have healthy recipes and gluten-free travel guides as well. And I want to start by sharing a bit of my Lyme story and how I got here. So in 2012, I went on my third camping trip ever in my life. And this is how my story started. I was not an outdoorsy person at all. I didn't know anything about Lyme disease. I didn't know anything about ticks or how to protect myself on a trip like this. And after that trip, for the first 2 months after, I had these weird flu-like symptoms that would come and go and just never really went away. And it took about 3 months. By late November, this was the day that I knew something was really wrong and I didn't know what was going on. I was drying my hair one day and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I had this bald spot on my head. And I had no idea how it happened, but I knew something was really going on with my body and my immune system. And so I made an appointment with a functional medicine doctor right away. And my first diagnosis was celiac disease. And so he said before he even tested me for it, he was willing to bet that my issue was all due to gluten, and that once I went on a gluten-free diet, that all of my issues were going to go away and my hair would grow back and everything would be normal again. Well, right away, what I did is obviously go on a gluten-free diet. I was like, if this is what's causing me so much pain and health issues, I'm 100% going to cut out gluten and be really strict with it. And so I went gluten-free, but I never really felt better. I started down a path of various diagnoses from different autoimmune diseases. So alopecia was that first one with that balding on my head. Then came celiac disease, then came Hashimoto's. I had already been dealing with psoriasis on and off throughout my life. And then I started having other issues and other symptoms. And so the next slew of diagnoses came, such as methylation issues, that my body wasn't detoxing properly, that I was having adrenal fatigue. One doctor went on to say that it was just anxiety and stress and it was all in my head, which was far from the truth. I had hormonal issues going on. I also started experiencing a lot of different gut issues. I had SIBO, candida, which I treated with nystatin and antibiotics for SIBO. I was diagnosed with leaky gut, and I started to develop over 60 food allergies. And this was me at the peak of all my allergies. I did allergy testing on my arms, and you can see I was reacting to all of these foods. And so it was really, really difficult. No one could figure out what was going on with me and, what was happening. And at this point, about 1.5 years, 2 years into it, I had over 100 different symptoms. Some of the worst ones were brain fog, loss of short-term memory. I had exhaustion, chronic fatigue, and pain throughout my body. My joints were aching. I became extremely sensitive to light and sound. Again, I was allergic to over 60 foods. And there's over 100 other symptoms that I was experiencing. And I document all of this on my blog as well. And most of my days were spent like this. I couldn't work anymore. I had to stop driving. I couldn't remember how to get home. I was running stop signs. I was pretty much laying in bed all day. This is how I spent the majority of my 30s. Some days I couldn't even walk. Some days Netflix was too much because my neurological system couldn't even process the lights and sounds. Fortunately, my dog Falcor spent days by my side and never left my side. But it was very, very hard days for me, especially to just go from a high-functioning person running a business. I had become a licensed architect to pretty much being a vegetable in bed. And so it took me 2 years to properly get diagnosed with Lyme disease. And unfortunately, this is a very common story for many reasons. And quite honestly, that's a whole other presentation that I can give at some point. But to put it very simply, the testing is very inaccurate for Lyme disease. And a lot of doctors are also not trained to learn how to test properly for Lyme disease, and they dismiss it. Lyme disease is unfortunately a very controversial disease, even though it is the fastest growing vector-borne disease in the US. And they estimate that by this year, there's going to be 2 million people in the US affected with Lyme disease. So this is a huge epidemic that we're dealing with. It's very, very missed by doctors, and doctors are very uneducated to be dealing with it. And so for the next 3 years, I treated with different modalities. And when I first started my Lyme journey, there's kind of two paths you can take. There's not really any standard of care. There's not any treatment that works for everybody that you can do. One path is to do a lot of antibiotics, which is something I didn't want to do, especially since I had just done so much work healing my gut and trying to come off of chronic sinus infections. I used to take a lot of antibiotics for those. And so I really wanted to approach it from a more holistic perspective, a more functional medicine perspective of really getting to the root cause and cleaning up my body. And so I did a variety of different treatments, including, let's see, I don't know why that's not playing. There we go. So no antibiotics, only natural treatments. Some of the things that helped me the most was I did some homeopathics with herbals. I did a lot of detox. So doing a lot of sauna, colonics, heavy metal chelation, things like that to really clean out my body. Ozone therapy was a really, really big help for me in my journey as well. I still use that to stay in remission today and stay healthy. I did all sorts of other vitamin IVs, such as vitamin C, oxidative therapies. Artesunate was really helpful as well. I did a pretty big treatment called the apheresis. That's kind of like a detox machine. It really kind of goes through and filters out your blood, and then they're able to do some of these other therapies after that where your body is really clean. I did LDI for a little bit to try to modulate my immune system. Mold detox was another huge piece of it. Thymus and peptides, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, those have been really helpful for modulating the immune system. Diet was a huge piece, which we're really going to get in depth with today. And there's a lot of other things, and I have a blog up on my website that talks about everything that I did to heal. But these are some of the key things that I felt really, really helped me the most. And today I've been in remission for 4 years. I'm 100% Lyme symptom free. I still have some things that I'm dealing with, like the celiac disease and Hashimoto's and things like that I need to manage, and keeping my immune system really healthy. But as far as Lyme symptoms go, I fortunately have been symptom free for about 4 years. And the thing that helped me the most was doing stem cell therapy. So in 2016, I did stem cell therapy using my own stem cells, and that was what finally got me into remission. And so I want to share a little bit about where I'm at today. So like I mentioned, I wrote my cookbook about 1.5 years ago. And really my cookbook is a way to celebrate that Lyme remission is possible, that you can do great things after you heal, and that you can go from an incurable disease to, really thriving in your life afterwards. And so that's a little bit about my story. But today what I really want to talk about with you is healing from Lyme disease with foods and natural treatments. And, diet is such a huge piece of it that we're going to get into. But first, I want to start by talking about what I kind of call are the 8 puzzle pieces of healing with Lyme. And these are the 8 things that I think if you're struggling with Lyme disease, you absolutely need to address. And so the first one is killing Lyme. So obviously, it's a bacterial infection. One of the unfortunate things is when you get bitten by a tick, you don't just get Lyme disease. You can get up to 2 to 3 dozen different co-infections that can be just as bad as Lyme disease, just as hard to treat. Lyme disease has over 300 strains, and so this is another reason the testing is very inaccurate. You don't know what strain you have. There's so many variations of it. So you really need to focus on killing at some point in your treatment. And this is where I think some people get a little stuck as well. I think some people, can you guys hear me okay? Was I muted? Okay, great. All right. Okay, cool. So let's keep going. Great. Okay, so killing. Let's get back into killing. So this is where I think people get really stuck. So people, get stuck with killing, and they don't really go on to some of the other things that we're going to be talking about here. And so antibiotics, I think, are very, very focused on some specific, bugs and strains and co-infections, but looking at it from a more kind of broad spectrum approach, using herbals, using homeopathics, using ozone, those are things that don't really care specifically what the bug is, but they, they can really kind of approach it from a broad approach. So killing is very important, but it's important not to get too stuck on it. And then we have detox. So this is another huge one that was very, very important. And this isn't detox like drinking a green juice and drinking your lemon water. This is deep, deep detox on your body. So this is extracting heavy metals. Most of the time people with Lyme are definitely going to have issues with at least lead and mercury. So getting that out of your body is critical. If you have amalgam fillings, this is something that you're going to want to get out of your body before you do chelation. Diet is obviously a big piece of this, which we're going to get into, but just really getting those toxins out of your body, using an infrared sauna, getting colonics, doing coffee enemas, those are all things that are going to help really clean out your body, because the more you can detox, the less hospitable a place it is for those bugs like Lyme and those co-infections to survive. And then we have dental issues. So this is one that I think a lot of people don't really pay attention to. And if you've ever had your wisdom teeth removed or you had a root canal, these are something that you really, really have to explore. This is something called cavitations. And what happens is if your bone does not heal properly when you get those cavitations or those wisdom teeth out or that root canal, it can become a pocket where different bacteria and parasites like to hide and live. And that really, really impairs your immune system because it can't really get to it to attack those things. And so they can just kind of live and thrive there. But it's something that your immune system is trying to get to. And so it's constantly wearing it down. And I couldn't believe what a big difference this made for me. I had cavitation surgery on my 2 lower wisdom teeth removal sites. And I couldn't believe how much it helped with anxiety and just overall feeling better. I didn't feel so worn out, and I could really, really feel a shift in it with my immune system after I had the surgery and had that cleaned out. Another one, obviously, that's a huge one, is gut and diet. We hear about leaky gut, SIBO, candida, all of those things need to be addressed. And I think it was really helpful, even though in those first 2 years, I didn't know I had Lyme, but I was doing really good things for my body that I had to work on anyways, such as healing my gut and cleaning up my diet, which we're going to get into more in depth here in a second. And of course, there's emotional work. I think this is one that people like to overlook or don't want to deal with. There's 2 kinds of emotions that I think go into being sick. So one of them is kind of like the emotional stress and trauma that got you to become sick to begin with. There's always something, I think, at the root cause. And then also, as you're healing, the PTSD and the trauma of being sick for so long, losing your life, losing your friends, losing the lifestyle that you used to live. And that also has to be dealt with in order for you to heal. You have to really accept where you are now and thrive as much as you can when you kind of get to that state. So it's really important to work with someone to really address the emotional side of healing as well. And environment is also a huge one. So mold and Lyme goes hand in hand. If you have Lyme disease, you might have issues with mold, or you become more susceptible to living in a moldy place. And a lot of times you don't even know you're living in mold. It could be inside the walls. It could be very subtle, but it's enough to stress your immune system that you can start to have issues. And so, it's really important to get your home tested. If you feel like you're having symptoms, you're not getting better, I really, really encourage you to rule out mold. Also, be cautious about living somewhere that is near a freeway. That can cause a lot of issues. I used to live near the freeway in San Francisco, and my solvents were really high because of that. And also any VOCs, if you're going to paint, things like that, really try to reduce the chemicals in your home. And one of my favorites is immune modulation. I think this is another one that people really overlook, but I think it's so critical. I think at a certain point with Lyme, you've killed enough. And at a certain point, it's your immune system that is still kind of like looking for the Lyme bacteria. It's very good at hiding for your immune system. It was going after those cavitation sites if you had them. And, this is something that needs to be addressed. So immune modulation can be anything from using peptides, like thymus therapy is really helpful. Stem cell therapy is really helpful. And LDI, I used a little bit, but I didn't have great success with it. It would give me maybe one good day a week that I felt better, but some people do love it. So that's another one to explore. Exosomes are a new immune modulation therapy. So all of those are really good. I recommend doing these after you've done a lot of detox, after you've done a lot of killing, and it's really you're at that last stage of just kind of repairing your immune system and trying to get it to work properly again. And of course, there's other supportive therapies that you should be doing while you're addressing all these other things. Making sure your sleep is optimized. It's really hard to sleep when you're sick and in pain. So whatever you can do to try to get better sleep, balancing your endocrine system and hormones. Neurotransmitters are another huge one. Those tend to be very swayed by Lyme disease. So working with a doctor that can help manage and balance your neurotransmitters can be really helpful. Genetics, we all have different genes. A lot of them can play roles into how we detox and what supplements work and don't work for us. Those are going to be really important to address as well. And then mitochondrial support and adrenal support, and then also treating any of those secondary conditions. So whether you have, autoimmune diseases or dealing with mold, things like that. So take a look at all these supportive therapies. So now let's get into what a healing diet is. This is going to be very individual for everybody. Some people thrive more on a plant-based diet. Some do better with low carb, some high protein, some high fat. So it's really up to you to figure out what kind of diet is going to work well for you. And we're going to get into that a little bit here. And so I want to talk about diet breakdowns a little bit. So, we have our standard American diet on one side all the way to the keto diet, which is more of a high fat, low fat diet. And finding where you thrive is going to be somewhere mostly probably on this chart. The standard American diet, it really is a SAD diet. That's the acronym for it. And it doesn't get any sadder than this. I mean, it's high carb, it's very processed, it's low in healthy fats, and you're really not getting a lot of nutrients when you eat food like this. And then, our food pyramid that we're all very familiar with, I think last year the FDA said that basically frosted flakes were healthier than avocados because of the saturated fat content. And that's just crazy. I think, can you guys not hear me again? Okay, I'm going to keep going because I'm getting messages that some people can't see me. So I'm getting a little worried with all these technical difficulties. But okay, let's keep going. All right, great. So let's talk about the gluten-free diet. So this is the first diet that I tried, like I mentioned. And really a gluten-free diet is just a, gluten-free version of the standard American diet. It's high carb, low fat, highly processed. And I started noticing whenever I would eat the gluten-free foods, I felt spacey, I felt tired. I was like, I thought I was supposed to feel better when I go gluten-free. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why I don't feel good yet. And so the next diet I did, my doctor recommended doing a paleo diet or doing an elimination diet. And so I did the autoimmune paleo diet, and that's a much stricter form of paleo. And at this point, when I started changing my diet, I only had the diagnosis of the 3 autoimmune diseases. So I thought this was going to be a good way to try to manage that and finally get over the edge of all the symptoms I was feeling. And I couldn't believe how much it helped. It didn't get rid of all my symptoms, obviously, because I still had Lyme and I was still decaying, but I couldn't believe how much taking out the grains and the processed foods and, the different inflammatory foods really, really helped my body. So this was a game changer. And the AIP diet isn't meant to be a long-term lifetime diet. It's really a diet that you do, A, to figure out what foods you're sensitive to, and B, start to add those foods back in so that you can all, eat the foods that you want to eat again once your body has time to heal. And so the paleo primal diet is what I've kind of evolved to after I did a strict elimination phase with the AIP diet. Did that for about 1.5 years and slowly started adding foods back in. The paleo diet is less strict, so you are able to eat nuts and seeds, but it's pretty in line with the AIP diet. And then I'm sure you've all heard of the keto diet, which is much more high fat. The thing with this one is sometimes people are only concerned with fat content. So this can easily be like a standard American diet, but just in high fat. So it's really important to learn about the fats that you're going to be eating, which we'll get into next. And I really like doing the bulletproof diet. This is what I kind of evolved to. It's a cyclical keto diet, so you can still eat some healthy carbs. But what I really love about this diet is that it really looks at the quality of your food and toxins in food, which we're going to get into as well. And so I eat what I call the Erica diet. And it falls somewhere in this line. Sometimes it changes. Sometimes I indulge in a little bit of a gluten-free treat here and there now that I've healed and recovered. But for the most part, I stay somewhere in this range. And, it's really up to you to test foods out, see what you do better on. Do you do better on high protein? Do you do better on low carb, high carb? It's really, really individual, and it's really important to find your own perfect diet. And for the most part, nowadays I eat grass-fed meats, wild fish, lots of healthy fats, lots of vegetables. I do low glycemic fruits like berries. I use a lot of fresh herbs in my cooking. Nuts and seeds, I don't tolerate the greatest, but I can have them on occasion. But in general, I try to stick to whole foods for everything that I eat. So now I want to talk about fats. So fats are so important, and especially when you focus on healthy fats. So those are things like your wild salmon, avocado, coconut, olive, those healthy saturated fats that are finally making a comeback after some bunk science that happened in the 1960s. So the sugar industry actually paid scientists to say that saturated fats were going to cause heart disease. And, since then we've shifted to low fat foods, which are high in sugar to make them taste good. And that's when we started to really see an increase in heart disease, obesity, diabetes, and all these diet-related diseases. So I'm going to share a link with you guys later that you can do a little bit more research on this, but it's pretty interesting when you dive into what happened back then. And fats are so important for our body for various reasons. So, our brain is 60% fat. So in order to run optimally, we really, really need those fats. A lot of them you can only get from food. So this isn't something that our body produces. Our nerves, as you can see in this diagram, this is called the myelin sheath. And what that does is that allows your signals to transmit through your body. And so saturated fats are what keep your nerves covered and have those, signals transmit as smoothly and quickly as possible. So when your diet is low in saturated fat, or you have an autoimmune disease such as MS or neurological disease like Lyme disease or Parkinson's, you're having a deterioration of your myelin sheath. So whatever you can do to try to rebuild that and keep it as strong and healthy as possible is really important. Also, our cell membranes are made out of a phospholipid layer, which is a fat layer. And so you really need to keep the outer layer of your cells strong, intact, so that things don't get into your cells and start to, break things down. And our hormones, all our hormones are built from fats. So again, if you're having hormone imbalance, like your estrogen is high or testosterone is low, without healthy fats, it can really get unbalanced. And fats help us absorb other nutrients and vitamins, especially vitamin D. That's a fat soluble vitamin that you need to eat with your fattiest meal. So these are all important reasons why our body needs fats. There are building blocks for so many parts of our body. And now, not all fats are created equal. So I'm spending a lot of time talking about saturated fats, which are going to be more stable and solid. So those are things like your coconut oil, your butter, ghee, tallow. Those are all things that are really great for cooking with. They have a really high smoke point. Things like avocado oil, olive oil, those are also great for dressings. They're a great fat. The ones you really want to avoid are going to be all your vegetable seed oils. So canola oil, corn oil, soybean, all of those are just so bad for you. They cause so much oxidative stress in your body. If you see that in an ingredient, run away as quickly as possible, especially if you start looking at margarine, vegetable shortening. Nowadays, I know a lot of people that have a gluten intolerance or celiac also have issues with dairy. So it can be easy to try to find these, replacement butters or dairy-free butters, but they're so filled with these toxic oils that they're going to be causing so much oxidative stress in your body. I really recommend trying to use coconut oil, or one of these other oils that are much safer to use. And talking about those oils, there's also the omega-3 versus omega-6. We're always trying to get more omega-3s in our diet. Those are anti-inflammatory. They can even help prevent blood clots. They improve your cholesterol. They really help build your nerve tissue that we just talked about. And then omega-6s are very inflammatory. So these actually can contribute to narrowing of your blood vessels. And these are found in those vegetable oils and grain-fed beef, which you really want to try to avoid if you can. So these are our nasty, nasty seed oils that you never, ever want to touch. A lot of them are actually just a byproduct of the food industry. So these are things that you just, you don't want to eat this. You don't want to eat a leftover byproduct and use that as a healthy oil. And so you're probably wondering, what should I cook with? So I really recommend, if you tolerate dairy, explore using grass-fed butter or ghee. Otherwise, look into tallow, lard, coconut oil, or avocado oil are all really great because they have a high smoke point, they won't oxidize, and they're going to be healthy for you. And you're probably wondering, won't eating all that fat make me fat? So again, it actually won't. This is that scientific study that I told you guys about that was manipulated. One of the scientists actually went on to become the chairman of Harvard's nutrition department, and he was part of this botched science. So there's a lot of shadiness that happened to really demonize these saturated fats that are finally making a comeback. And now there is one variable with these saturated fats. So there is a gene called the ApoE4 gene. If you do have this means that you actually don't tolerate saturated fats well. So it's really important to do some genetic testing, see what kind of genes you have. If you have this, you may have to be a little more careful and use more of that olive oil instead. So now I want to get into the toxins that I talked about. So toxins in food are interesting. You probably don't really think about these things, but there's a couple different ones that the plants actually use as a defense system, against animals and predators from eating the plants, but these can actually affect humans. So the first one is anti-nutrients. So Most of these are going to be most common in grains, legumes, and nuts. Anti-nutrients can cause a leaky gut. They can cause inflammation in some people when eaten. So this is just something that you need to pay attention to and see how you feel when you eat these kinds of foods. We've also got lectins. This has gotten a lot of popularity recently with the new book called The Plant Paradox. Basically anything that has a seed can have lectins. And so these can really impact your small intestine. We all are probably familiar with the villi in your intestine, especially if you're celiac. Those are the little hairs that absorb the food. With celiac disease, they can be atrophied, but lectins can also cause a lot of damage to how you're absorbing your nutrients. So again, these are common in legumes, grains, nightshades, anything with a seed. So even produce with a seed. And then we have phytates. So these are another defense to keep animals from eating them, but they can actually make the minerals in your body less available. So especially magnesium, zinc, iron, you really want to minimize these if you're eating a lot of these. You can soak them. It does help a little bit, but not always. And some people are just so sensitive to it, especially if you're in the beginning stages of healing your gut. I really recommend taking all these things out for a couple months just to let your body heal and then kind of introducing them one at a time to see how you feel. Now, oxalates are an interesting one. So these actually can create sharp little calcium crystals in your body. And so this is what causes kidney stones. It can also cause little crystals in your muscles. So, if you're someone that has Lyme or a chronic pain condition and you have all this pain, it's so easy to blame everything on Lyme, but you could be having issues from something that you're eating every day. So if you eat a lot of raw cruciferous vegetables, especially, that kale or spinach salad, or you're juicing a lot, you might be actually having some pain from these oxalate crystals. So it's definitely something to explore, something to take out of your body just for a little bit and see if you can notice a difference with that. And my favorite here, mycotoxins. So this is one that we don't really think about in our food supply. Unfortunately, about 28% of the population has the HLA gene, which is a genetic mutation that does not let your body detox mold. And so this is really, really interesting because your exposure can cause brain fog, inflammation, anxiety, cravings. It really weakens your immune system. It can make you more susceptible to damage from gluten, food allergies, different autoimmune conditions. And so this is something that you really, really need to address. And this is where I really like the bulletproof diet because it really looks at mold in foods. And so one of the things is aflatoxin. So this is the most common mold in foods. And coffee is unfortunately one of the highest foods that has it. So if you've ever had a cup of coffee that just tastes really bitter, you kind of crash after you drink it, makes you a little jittery, a lot of times that's actually mold on the coffee. It's not the coffee itself. And unfortunately, the US and the Canada have no limits on how much mold is allowed to be on coffee. So other countries like in Europe, they do. So a lot of times they actually send their moldy coffee to the US and we drink it and we have all these side effects and issues with it. So there's two brands of coffee on the market, Bulletproof and Purity, both test their beans for mold. And those are the only two coffees that I drink. And I have noticed such a huge difference. I actually used to think I was intolerant and allergic to coffee or had become allergic to it because I was having issues. And as soon as I switched to a mold-free coffee, it completely changed my life. So it's just something to explore if you're experiencing that. And then we have GMOs and pesticides, of course. I'm not going to get into this because this is very controversial, but it's definitely something if you're detoxing, you don't want to be eating pesticides. And quite frankly, if someone has to wear these yellow suits to go walk through the fields and spray our food, I'm pretty sure we probably shouldn't be putting that in our body. So it's a very individual decision, but I can tell you I don't eat anything that's GMO or sprayed with pesticides or not organic. And another one that we probably don't think about is cooking. So cooking is actually a form of processing our food. And when you cook things at very high temperatures, whether they're smoked, fried, or grilled, you can actually create two carcinogens called HCA and PAH. And the only other sources of these two carcinogens are car exhaust and cigarette smoke, which is just disgusting. So, really, really want to pay attention to what temperature you're cooking your food at. Ideally, if you're cooking proteins or fats, it's best to keep it below 320 degrees to kind of prevent these carcinogens. But always kind of pay attention to, how often you're eating highly cooked food that's been cooked at very high temperatures. And fermented foods are another one I want to touch on. So many times we hear, oh, fermented foods are so good for your gut and, they're so healing and probiotic rich, but a lot of people have histamine issues. And especially if you have, Lyme or mold, a lot of people are having mast cell activation syndrome right now with that. So histamines are not your friends if you are experiencing any of these things. If your body is very reactive, if you have a lot of food allergies, definitely recommend staying away from fermented foods until you can tolerate that well. So as you can see, all of these things cause inflammation, and it's really easy to blame Lyme for every symptom you have. Be like, oh, I have brain fog, it's Lyme. Oh, my joints hurt, it's Lyme. But a lot of these things can actually come from the food you're eating as well. So I think it's really critical if you want to really recover from Lyme, you really need to clean up your diet. You really need to reduce inflammation from what you're eating. And then you can start to peel back and see what's left. And whatever's left is probably Lyme or one of those secondary conditions at that point. But at least you've cleared out a lot of these hidden food intolerances that could be causing your issues and making you feel sick for longer than you need to be sick. So really critical to heal your gut, really critical to find those hidden food intolerances. And it sounds complicated. You're just like, how am I supposed to do all this? It's overwhelming. There's so many foods to go through and figure out if you can eat or not. I do feel like it's getting a lot easier. I started my health journey back in 2012, and just in these 8 years, it's been such a huge change to see how many more products are available. I went to Expo West last year, and I would say 75% of the products were gluten-free. We're here at Nourish Festival, which is all about gluten-free living. And there's a huge demand for this lifestyle. And, unfortunately, people are just becoming more sick. They're realizing that the food they eat is starting to affect them more. So I think as we continue, things are going to get easier. There's going to be more awareness for it. And, a healthy diet is a change in your lifestyle. It's not like you're just going to change your diet while you're healing and then you're going to go back to whatever you were eating before. That's just not going to happen. So you have to really look at this as a full lifestyle change, and it means prioritizing food, nourishing your body. This is really a form of self-care. And, finding a new community, finding friends that eat the same way as you can be really helpful. Getting support from your family and friends, ordering pre-made meals, working with a health coach, whatever you need to do to be able to make that step to really kind of move forward and, make the diet changes. I do offer health coaching. If anyone is interested in working together, we can do a custom package, whether you want to focus on healing your gut or working on Lyme disease or whatever it is that you want to work on. It could be really helpful to work with a coach. And I just want to talk about some of the key takeaways. So, food affects you more than you think. If you have an autoimmune disease, but you're not getting better, I definitely recommend ruling out Lyme disease or mold. Those can be really, really big underlying things that hide and just hamper your immune system. Even though I had those autoimmune diseases, Lyme disease was the trigger for them. So if I hadn't discovered Lyme, I would probably continue developing autoimmune diseases until someone could figure it out. And really trust your body and yourself when things don't seem right. I can't tell you how many doctors I went to that just dismissed me and said, oh, you just have something we can't figure out, or you need to go see a therapist, or you have anxiety, or you just need to take Xanax. Like, it was unbelievable how dismissive so many doctors were in my journey. But I really believed in my gut, no pun intended, that something was really wrong. And I just kept going to more and more doctors. I kept being my own detective to figure out what was really wrong. And same with food. You could be exposed to an allergen, be a food detective. My celiac antibodies were not going down for a year. I was constantly feeling gluten. Come to find out, the mouth guard I had been wearing for a year after my diagnosis actually had gluten in it. So, you have to really, really be your own detective. Look at everything you're touching, everything you're putting in your mouth to really, really uncover those hidden things that could be hampering your immune system. And to recap on diet, just be really conscious of what you're eating. You want to minimize those toxic foods, find your own individual diet, and really experiment with foods. Try food out, see how you feel, use the tools and resources that are available to you. And remember, it's a lifestyle change, not a diet change. It's not going to happen overnight. And you're constantly going to be kind of testing foods and listening to your body. Like, for example, the past few months, I've been feeling like every time I eat chicken, I felt really tired and kind of had brain fog. And I was like, am I getting gluten? Like, what is this? Like, why am I not feeling good? And I noticed every time I ate chicken, I started feeling like this. And I haven't really had too many food sensitivities anymore. I had maybe 4 or 5 after everything kind of cleared up. But I did a food allergy test recently, and sure enough, chicken was a mild sensitivity. So I've gotten really good at noticing when foods don't work with my body and when they do. So I'm going to give chicken a rest for a couple of months, maybe 3 to 6 months, and then see if my body's healed enough to be able to tolerate it again. But your body's always changing. You're always developing new sensitivities. Other sensitivities might go away after you eliminate the food for 3 to 6 months. So it's really kind of a dance with your body and gut constantly. And I want to let you guys know my cookbook is available. So it does have a 28-day meal plan. So if you're one of those people that struggles with planning food and what to get, it has 4 weeks of meal plans. It has all your grocery lists figured out for you as well. And I'm offering 10% off my book and merchandise with code NOURISHED if you buy it on my website. So you guys can enjoy the recipes in there. I literally eat my book. This is like, I made this book because I wanted to just kind of make my own 4-week meal plan because I was sick of meal planning every week. So I was like, I'm just going to make a month of my favorite recipes and just eat it. Because if I eat it once a month, I'm not going to get sick of it. And so we literally eat my book all the time when I'm not making new recipes for the blog. And I also did all the photography and design on it. So it was really, really fun little project to work on. And one thing I want to just kind of end with is your diet is not only what you eat, it's what you watch, what you listen to, what you read, and the people around you. And I can't stress this enough. You know, if you're in a bad environment, if you have people around you that aren't supportive, you know, you really have to pay attention to those things as well. That stress is affecting your body, that stress is affecting your immune system. You know, you have to think of your immune system kind of like a bank account. The more things you do to kind of raise it up and keep it healthy, the better. You're always going to have things draining you, whether it's a food allergy, you know, moldy coffee, someone that you got in a fight with. So you really have to try to always be balancing it and keeping it as high as possible with everything you do in your life. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can email me. And then also I put together a resource page. This is going to have links to everything I talked about. It's going to have links about the coffee, the study, where to source food, different recipes, things like that. So you can go to thetrailtohealth.com/nourished and let me know if you have any questions. So I'm going to scroll through the questions here. I saw some questions coming in, so I'm going to make sure that I can get those answered for you guys. Let's see. All right. The coffees that I mentioned that are mold tested are Bulletproof Coffee and Purity Coffee. You can also find links to them here in the link as well. Do I have any advice for making the tests and therapies I received affordable? Yeah, definitely. So, you know, I definitely did some treatments that were expensive, but I did a lot of treatments that were also very cost effective, very inexpensive. I mean, diet, I can't tell you how much diet changed my life. Like, it was such a huge thing. And that's something that everybody can really do. Everyone can try to clean up their diet. If you're trying to do a paleo style diet, you know, use cheaper cuts of meats like grass-fed meats, use ground beef, you know, things like that. Vegetables, you can order like a CSA box, which is much more cost effective. So getting those organic produce and high quality meats can be very cost effective that way. Herbals are very inexpensive and made a huge impact. Same with homeopathics. Those can be really, really helpful. You know, chelation therapy, you can do it orally instead of IV, which really cuts back on the price. Investing in a home sauna, you know, there's some that are kind of like pop-up tents, saunas that can be really effective. Those are pretty cheap. You can sit in those every day. There's also sauna blankets if you want to do that. Saunas are huge, huge, huge for detox. So those are really easy ways to kind of get that integrated into your things, into your routine. Let's see. Mouth guards have gluten, but also retainers. Yes, that's actually how I discovered that the mouth guard had gluten. One morning I was reading an article about a child that had gluten in their retainer, and it's listed the polymer. I have a blog post on it if you guys want to check it out on my website. It listed the polymer, and sure enough, the mouth guard I was wearing had that polymer in it. So that was actually how I discovered it. So it's just crazy that these things happen. Let's see here. Is the Western blot a reliable Lyme test? Yes and no. So let's talk about Lyme testing a little bit. The Western blot looks at about 5 or 6 bands. And what those bands is they're antibody bands. So the first issue with the antibody test is your immune system has to be healthy enough to be making antibodies to Lyme disease or one of these specific bands. Now, that's not always the case with Lyme disease, because one of the things that Lyme does is it suppresses your immune system. Lyme hides from your immune system. It wreaks havoc on your immune system. So it may not be working properly to even create these antibodies. Now, the Western blot is better than the ELISA test, which is going to be your typical Quest or LabCorp test. Those, I think, only test for 2 bands. the Western blot, test for those additional bands. But again, you have to have an immune system healthy enough to react to those bands. Now, a lot of doctors will use that kind of as a starting point, to see what bands come up positive. They might also do a challenge where you do a little bit of Lyme treatment, whether it's some herbals or antibiotics, to see if you can kind of stir up the Lyme, and then do another test and see if any additional bands show up. That's one thing you can do. Another thing is I recommend seeing a Lyme literate doctor. A lot of times they'll use testing. They'll do some other tests, maybe like a CD57, C4A. Those can be some supportive tests that work as well. And then it'll also base it on a clinical diagnosis. So what are your symptoms? Are they coming and going, which is very typical for Lyme? What are your other tests saying is going on? And so they might do a diagnosis more on that. Now, there's a third test called the DNA connections. And so that actually tests for the Lyme DNA bacteria, the bacteria from the DNA of the bacteria. So with that, it's a little more accurate because you're looking for the Lyme bacteria. But here's the thing with that. It's a blood test. Lyme doesn't stay in your blood for very long. As soon as you get the tick bite, Lyme doesn't like to stay where it's oxygenated. So it goes and hides in your joints, connective tissues, things like that. So in order for the DNA connections test to be as accurate as possible, they recommend doing a deep tissue massage or a very, very vigorous exercise before you do the test. It's a urine test, I think they actually test with. So then that way, you've gotten some of that Lyme out into your system. That can make the test a little bit more accurate. So unfortunately, there's not a reliable Lyme test yet. I hope that they have one soon, because that's one of the issues with Lyme disease is you can't even properly get tested for it. So unfortunately, you just have to use a combination of things, and seeing a Lyme literate doctor is really key to be able to help you kind of look at the different tests and see if they can figure out a diagnosis for you. Let's see. Can I have a link to the good and bad oils to avoid? Yes, that's going to be shown on this link as well. Actually, I have all the information about the healthy fats and bad fats in here. Is cooked kale and spinach all right? Yes. So once you cook it, the oxalates are gone. It's just making sure you avoid it when it's raw. That's when you have the issues with the oxalates. What type of mold test do I recommend? Okay, so there's a couple different ones. There's mold tests for your home. So you can either work with a mold practitioner that is, can come over to your house and take a look and do the different testing. If you're going to do a mold test for your body, there's one called Real-Time Labs that's really helpful. So that one, it's a urine test, and it looks to see if you have mold in your body. You can also do the organic acids test from Great Plains Labs. That one's not necessarily, they have a mycotoxin test as well, but doing the organic acids can also give you some extra information if you're dealing with mold. And there's a new test, actually. If you know you have Lyme and mold, or you think you have Lyme and mold, but you're not really sure which one is causing your issues anymore because they can overlap so much, there's a new test called the Genie test. And it's made by Dr. Shoemaker, who's kind of one of the pioneers in mold. He's a mold doctor. He has figured out a test that's able to tell you based on different markers what your issue is, whether you're more Lyme dominant or mold dominant, and what is kind of off. So that sounds like a really, really interesting test. It's maybe been out about 6 months or so, but I've heard really, really positive things about that. It's a little expensive, but it's also expensive to continue treating Lyme, thinking that that's your issue when your issue might actually be mold, and you have to do a different treatment for that. So let's see. Let me take a look. Any other questions coming in here? How can you treat SIBO and Candida naturally? So they're tricky to treat naturally. I'm not, as I said, I'm not a fan of antibiotics at all, but SIBO is one of those places where you may have to use some antibiotics. Diet is also huge with them. So, cutting out sugar. With SIBO, it's specific foods. SIBO is more focused kind of on fructose. So there's two types of SIBO. There's SIBO that's in the beginning of your gut, small intestines, or there's one that's at the end. And so they're treated differently. They're treated with two different antibiotics and two different dietary kind of approaches. So depending on which SIBO you have, that's important. With Candida, Candida is another tough one really to get rid of without using some kind of pharmaceutical. So I did nystatin. I did a couple rounds of that, and I think that's what really cleared it up, along with diet. Like no sugar at all, nothing with yeast. You really, really want to cut out anything that can potentially feed the Candida. And then, making sure you're out of mold for Candida as well. It can be one of those things that can really aggravate it as well. Let's see. All right, any other questions? Let me go through here and see if I've got more questions. Would it be okay to chat with us with me recording some of the questions? Yes, I set up some private chats that you guys can book afterwards. Also, if you want to set up another session, feel free to email me. We can always talk about that. Yeah, any other questions from anyone? All right. Well, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Feel free to book those sessions with me. It's been a pleasure to be here and share my knowledge and information. I hope this was helpful for everyone. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. That was a little tricky in the beginning, but glad we made it through and I was able to share this with you. So thank you again. My name is Erica Schlick. If you have any questions, please reach out and I appreciate your time.